It had a plan built, ready to implement for the destruction of the state of Israel, and that is why currently we are in this conflict. But in Israel, we are a democracy, a very strong Supreme Court. We have elections. We have a democratic government, and I think many times people don't understand it. And one of the myths, which for some reason is quite prevalent in the Caribbeans, is that the Jews are not indigenous to that land. On the contrary, the Jews are the one who are indigenous, and we have, it's not just in the Bible, but we have archaeological findings and so many other evidence that show the Jewish connection to the land of Israel that goes back to more than 3,500 years. This is our indigenous land.
So on that note, I was going to carry the conversation somewhere else, but on that note, Palestinians were in the state of Palestine for a long while, and then, well, the British
There was
rule, British mandate
no,
allowed for.
well, just to explain history, there was never a state of Palestine. Never. It never existed. The name Palestine actually was given by the Romans about 2,000 years ago in order to kind of erase the Jewish connection, because before that it was called the Kingdom of Judea. And then the Romanians who took control of that area called it Palestina, Syria, Palestina. And everyone who lived in that area was called Palestinians. And it has never been, there has never been a Palestinian state, never had a Palestinian leadership, and none whatsoever. The name Palestine derives from what the Romans did. But during the times, people who were living there were called Palestinians. So before the state of Israel was erected in 1948, the area which was under British mandate, and before that under Turkish, the Ottoman Empire, and you go back to the Byzantines and so many others who were controlling that area, everyone was called Palestinians. So even the Jews were called Palestinians, and we have many Israelis living today in Israel who their great grandparents had a passport saying that they were Palestinian.
Okay.
So just to clarify that there has never ever in that area been a Palestinian state.
So what then do you think would have been some of the turning points or um, key historical turning points that would have put Israel in its position that it's in today?
So, as I said, Jews had been living there for 3,500 years. After the Second Temple was destroyed, the Romans who wanted to eliminate the Jewish presence in that land, they dispersed them into all four corners of the earth. That's why you can find Jews everywhere around the planet, in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, in Europe, and all around. So the Jews have been dispersed for more than 2,000 years, but every day in their prayers, they look towards Jerusalem and would pray for the next year in Jerusalem. That has been a prayer that has been accompanying the Jewish people for 2,000 years. So that was a big turning point when the exile committed by the Romans. And then there were different rulers. The Ottoman Empire, which is Muslim, was ruled there before the British Mandate. But before that, you had Christians and Muslims, and you had different rulers there. But of course, the historic turning point was when the Jewish people were permitted to return to their ancestral land and to create the state of Israel. And I just need to remind you that in 1947, the United Nations actually offered a partition plan,
Yes.
telling both the Arabs and the Jews who lived in there, because they were not called, there was no Palestinian state, so they were called the Arabs of Palestine and the Jews of Palestine. We were offered a two states, a partition plan. The Arabs immediately, the Jews accepted it. The Arabs immediately rejected it under the promise and the premise of other Arab countries in the region who told them, listen, don't worry, don't agree to this. We will attack this new state. We will exterminate all the Jews. They will flee. They will be killed, and then we will be able to give you that land. But what happened was that miraculously, in 1948, in the independence war of Israel, we managed to beat these five Arab militaries that infiltrated, that attacked Israel. Israel managed to defend itself, and that we have been existing since then as the Israeli state, newborn state, for 77 years.
And I can contend with that. But what the perspective I hear from people is that Palestinians were living there. Yes, I mean, Arab Palestinians were living there, and yes, I can understand the Jews were living there as well. But it seems as if there was just an infiltration. That's what
Yeah,
it
well,
comes
the
across
Jews,
as.
it's not just that the Jews were living there, the Jews preceded the Arabs. And there's been a continuous Jewish presence there for the 3,500 years. It is true that Arabs emigrated from the Hijaz, from Saudi Arabia, from different parts of the Middle East to
And Europe.
that area that we now call Israel, that they did immigrate there. And that is why, and then that is why there is an Arab presence there. But it originated from a Jewish presence, and it's important to recall that. Now, I am not ignoring the fact that there are Arabs living there. We have been seeking peace with them. And as I told you, even in 1947, the Jews accepted the partition plan. The Arabs rejected it. Since then, there were about 5 peace agreements on the table, offered by the Jewish state, offered by Israel, mostly in the coordination with the United States. And at the end, only to be rejected by the what we call now the Palestinians, and that is very unfortunate. We believe that it is in our interest to reach a peaceful resolution, to live in peace side by side next to our neighbors. But as long as they are committed to our destruction, just like it's written in the charter, in the Hamas charter, to destroy the Jewish presence in the land, we will need to continue to defend ourselves.
And just for in no uncertainty, and just for your clarification, are you in support of or are you denying the state of Palestine?
Well, right now, when we left Gaza in 2005, we gave the Palestinians all the tools needed to create their own entity, their own state. We left Gaza. We completely left Gaza. We uprooted graves. We dragged families out of their homes in order to allow the Palestinians to have their own rule. They could have called it whatever they want. We had no preconditions. And unfortunately, what happened was they elected Hamas to govern them. And we were confronted by this terroristic entity that has been just attacking Israel on a daily basis since 2006, 2007. So right now, I don't think the Palestinians themselves are ready or prepared for any kind of Palestinian state. I think right now what we have to thrive for is to call the Palestinians to lay down the weapons, stop with their terrorist tactics, in order for us to try and find a diplomatic solution to the current situation.
I hear you on that.
Um, as we're on this part of the conversation, I wanted to ask about, you know, how does Israel view the role of no, sorry, of
Hamas?
Hamas in Gaza, right? And is it well, not just as a governing body, but as a military force? How are y'all viewing?
Well, as I mentioned, they've been governing Gaza since 2007, 2006, 2007. Hamas are a very, very extreme jihadistic ideological organization, very similar to ISIS. They see that one of the reasons they are very much against Israel is because they see the presence of non-Muslims in that area, what they call it takfir. It goes against their deep-rooted religion. So unfortunately, with Hamas, there is no dialogue. After Hamas was elected, we tried to enable them to govern Gaza because we said they were elected by the Gazans. But what we got in return was a barrage of rockets on a daily basis towards our civilian populations. So I think we've reached, definitely after that terrible massacre of October 7th, where they infiltrated a dance festival and different kibbutzim, these communities of Israelis, and they raped and murdered and burnt the people and kidnapped 251 people. I think we have now reached the understanding that we can no longer allow them or permit them to control Gaza. So the current conflict that is taking place right now in Gaza has two main objectives. One is the release of all the remaining 53 hostages that have been there for 619 days, have been suffering in the tunnels of Gaza under Hamas terrorists. And the second objective is to make sure that Hamas no longer is a threat towards Israel.
Mm-hmm. So would you say you agree with the statement that Israel occupies Palestinian territory, Gaza Strip, and West Bank?
Well, I definitely don't agree with that because, as I said, there's never been a Palestinian state. But on the other hand, I don't ignore the fact that there are Palestinians. We have tried more than once. You can, just Google Israeli peace attempts with Palestinians.
Mm-hmm.
We have tried many times to reach some kind of an agreement with them where they would get either a state or some kind of sovereignty, and we've always failed. We failed because the Palestinians have been too extreme and have been brainwashed to believe that the Jews are descendants of Satan, of pigs and monkeys. They've been learning this in schools, that the Jews are their enemies. And we have to stop with the incitement. We have to stop with this brainwashing if we want to get to any kind of diplomatic solution. I think that right now a Palestinian state is not on the table. It is not something that is viable. It would be something that will only allow the very extreme elements to continue being a threat against Israel and against Western interests. They would allow Iran to infiltrate. So, unfortunately, history has shown us that although we have offered that opportunity to the Palestinians, ultimately it has always been rejected.
So why do you think that is? Because I can't see them outright rejecting on the basis of they just don't like Israelis. Is it that they don't feel like they receive fair treatment with the peace agreements that come their way?
Well, you see that's the issue. They completely believe that if they don't get the whole land, including what is now Israel, proper Israel, that they are not going to be treated fairly. Look at all these demonstrations that take place across the world. The leading chant is, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." Mm-hmm. Now, what that actually means, that many of those who are chanting, what we call the useful idiots, and excuse my French, pardon my French, but the useful idiots that are supporting these demonstrations don't even know which river and which sea we're discussing. So they are talking about, they are chanting. So what they mean is between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. All that part between, all of it is all of the state of Israel. So they believe that there should not be any kind of a two-state solution or two sides residing one next to the other. They believe they have to get all of it. And as long as that belief continues to be the leading belief within the Palestinian population, unfortunately, Israel will have to continue defending itself. We will not be able to reach a diplomatic agreement.
Mm-hmm. What does sorry, the UN the UN and many other countries, they consider Israeli settlements in the West Bank to be illegal under international law. So what is Israel's stance on that, or response to
Well,
that?
unfortunately, and I know that for Trinidadians, it's very difficult to understand this, but we do not see the UN as a fair broker. You have to remember that the UN is comprised of states, of countries. The majority of these countries, the majority of them, and this is, you take all the Muslim and Arab countries, and then you throw into the mix countries like China and Russia, Venezuela, Bolivia, Nicaragua, will always side by the Palestinian side. So unfortunately, our voice is not heard in the UN. Mm-hmm. It is heard by a small number of Western democracies that do understand what Israel is going through, but the majority, unfortunately, are automatically anti-Israel. So I cannot relate to anything that comes out from the United Nations. I'm residing here in Panama. Panama has a population that is half the size of the state of Israel. Panama is now currently in its sixth term in the Security Council of the United Nations. 6 times, which they deserve to be. I think it's a democratic country with excellent values. They deserve to be. But Israel has not been even once a member of the UN Security Council because we are never allowed to be elected to take part in that seat. If you go to to other elements in the United Nations, Israel is not a member. They're not part of it. The United Nations Human Rights Council, which is a very funny name for that council because it has countries like the Pakistanis or Cuba or Iran, which are leading different committees there. Israel is not allowed to do that. Unfortunately, the United Nations is not a fair broker. I know it's very difficult to understand it from the Caribbeans because you don't have to face that kind of unfair treatment. But we have been facing that bias for decades.
Mm-hmm. Would Israel want to reconcile, the whole settlement expansion with, or how would Israel go about doing that? To reconcile
You talk about the settlement as settlement is not an issue because as we've proven in the past, if we want Israel is a democratic government, and if it reaches a decision to do something, it will do it. In Gaza, as I told you, 10,000 what you call settlers, but for them it was their homes, were forcefully evacuated from their homes because the Israeli government reached that decision. Now, it's important to understand that area, not Gaza, not Judea and Samaria, West Bank, has never been under never been a Palestinian state. Let me even tell you this: between 1948 to 1967, Gaza was under Egyptian rule, and the West Bank was under Jordanian rule. During those 19 years, they never said we are going to create a Palestinian state here. They never even thought about it. Their whole motive or what their focus was on destroying the state of Israel. So settlements, first of all, we've proven will not stand as an obstacle to any kind of agreement. But secondly, it is an unfair characterization to call them, to say that they do not belong there. They belong there because our ancestors lived there. They belong there just not any less than any of the Palestinians living there. But I will even add to that. During the Oslo Agreement in the 1990s, the Palestinians were given their own autonomy on big parts, on big chunks of those areas, in Gaza, and also what we call Area C, which is completely under the Palestinian Authority rule. But they haven't been using that or taking advantage of it to create their own state because their objective is to see the elimination of all of the state of Israel. And I think the Western world needs to understand that if the Palestinians do not change the way of the way they think, unfortunately, we will not see an end to this current conflict.
I've seen multiple conversation, surrounding these words. I don't want to mess up the pronunciation of the word, but apartheid, yes, apartheid, occupation, colonialism, when speaking about Israel and what's happening. So how would you?
So let me try and slice all these terms. And unfortunately, that is part of the propaganda that is being used by many of the anti-Israelis, and they're being quite successful. But when people understand what really is going on, they understand how ludicrous it is. The word the apartheid means the separation of races. Okay, that was what happened in South Africa, where a very small white minority was in power, was ruling a large black majority, and they were not the black population, the black members of people of South Africa were not allowed to be in the leadership, not Supreme Court judges, nothing. I even remember, I wanted to tell you something. My father was born in South Africa. He left South Africa at a very young age and immigrated to Israel because he was fed up with the apartheid regime. I remember visiting as a young child when we visited South Africa because he went there to convince other people to leave South Africa. He was so much against the apartheid regime. And you go into the airport, I remember as a kid, and there were bathrooms for white men and white women, and in the end of the airport, these very dirty, untaken, two bathrooms for black men and black women that were not taken care of. That is apartheid. In Israel, there is no apartheid. On the contrary, all the Arabs living in Israel, which are 20% of the population in Israel, get full rights and no different to any other Israeli. And as I said, they are members of the Supreme Court. They are in the military. They are members of parliament. They have the right to vote and to be elected. It is just ludicrous. What people, when they try and say apartheid, is they're trying to refer to the relationship between Israel and the Palestinians outside of Israel, those that are in Gaza or in the West Bank. And that is ludicrous because they are not under Israeli rule. They have their own rule, their own governance, which unfortunately is not trying to create an own independent, viable entity, but rather trying to use a victim card against
Your
Israel all the
Excellency,
time.
I can hear that, but that goes against exactly what we had the Palestinian journalist Yusuf Al-Hulu, what he said to us, that right now, what it seems like, this is what he showed us on video as well, was that Palestinians are living in squalor right now, and there's a blockade around them, and it's guarded by Israeli forces, so they can't really move, they can't get aid in any sort of food, any sort of materials to rebuild. So that's what it's seeming like from the outside perspective. Can you speak to that?
Well, the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to tell a lie. Well, that is just absolutely right. They've been, since October, you probably remember, a day after October 7, 2023, they were saying there's starvation in Gaza, there's a famine in Gaza. It's been nearly 2 years, and you have no evidence for that. Israel is allowing and enabling humanitarian aid to enter Gaza by the millions of tons of humanitarian aids are entering Gaza, a huge amount, huge quantities. What we are trying to prevent is Hamas taking over by force, taking over the aid and using it first of all for its own terrorists, and secondly to sell it in the markets in Gaza to make a profit. Now, again, it's very important to remember. When they show Israel has its borders with Gaza and with the West Bank. So of course Israel needs to monitor these borders in order to prevent the entry of terrorists, malicious elements into Israel. That every country had that right of monitoring its borders. But I'm telling you, the Israeli ambassador, if the Palestinians would lay down their weapons and would say, we are prepared to live in peace side by side by the Jewish state, they would have a wonderful life. They would have, all the dreams would come true. But they still are striving for the destruction of the state of Israel. And anytime I would ask you, anytime you are speaking to a Palestinian, to any Palestinian, ask them, are you willing to live side by side Israel as a Jewish state? Do you recognize Israel as an independent Jewish state? Try and get from them that answer. And you will see you will not get a direct answer. Ask them as well if they see terrorists who have killed Jews, if they see them as heroes. And unfortunately, that is how they are recognized within the Palestinian entities as heroes. While we, if there is, God forbid, an Israeli who attacks Palestinians based on their identity, not as in self-defense, he will be deemed as a terrorist by Israel. There is such a huge difference in the way our societies treat violence and treat death, unfortunately. But I would urge you to ask these Palestinians the next time you speak with them if they are willing to live side by side peacefully next to the state of Israel as a Jewish state.
So Palestine specifically, not Palestine, but Hamas, they wouldn't be able to continue. They can't go toe to toe with Israel. I think that is pretty blatant. They can't go toe to toe with Israel, but they're still trying. I've heard the perspective that if it were that they set down their arms, that and it would allow for Israeli occupation. It would allow for them to be completely eradicated. So a similar thing to what you are saying would happen, or they would want for Israel to just completely be erased. Some people may feel like if. Go ahead.
It's amazing because that is what we've been saying for decades. That if Israel, if the Arabs laid their weapons, there would be peace tomorrow. If Israel laid its weapons, there would be no Israel. And they're now utilizing what we've been saying for decades on that part. It's untrue. It's really not true. We have look. Israel had the power to really do much more to really eradicate Hamas. But if we do that, we will cause huge harm to the population, and we do not want to do that. So right now, that is why we are handling ourselves very carefully in Gaza in order to avoid as much as we can civilian casualties. And the numbers coming from Gaza, you have to remember, are all based on Hamas. What's called the Gaza Ministry of Health, they like to euphemize these words, is completely Hamas. And it's so interesting how these numbers, they never mention how many of them are Hamas terrorists or fighters, whatever they call it, and how many are civilians. But it is just untrue. If the Palestinians would lay their weapons, Israel would allow them, and not, or they're allowed, I mean, during the Oslo Accords, remember, we allowed weapons to enter. We allowed it to enter Gaza and the West Bank under the Palestinian Authority, armored vehicles, to be used for their police, because it was part of the deal that we were trying to do with the Palestinians in order for them at the end to create their Palestinian state next to Israel. Unfortunately, what happened is they started with the Intifada, which is a violent uprising against Israel, and that all went down. That all stopped.
So why do they think that they have to even have an intifada? Because what is, you're using the word allowed, but allowed, it implies that you have rule over them. You're like the parent to the child.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. We were the ones, we were the power governing that area, and we said we are willing to relinquish our governance here to allow the Palestinians, at the end, even to have a state. That was part of the Oslo Accords, and that's why I'm saying we allowed, because we were in control of that area, and we were relinquishing control of that area to allow them to have their own self-governance. Now, the reason they won the Intifada is and what I've been mentioning a couple of times is that they do not want to they do not want to accept only Gaza and the West Bank. They want to control all the state of Israel, have no Jews left here. You know, I can send you, you said a video that he showed you, I can send you videos of students, Palestinian students, who are saying in front of camera that they are learning in schools that the Jews are their enemies and that they need to they need to eradicate the state of Israel. That is what they have been learning in their schools. That has been part of the Palestinian curriculum. I know it's very difficult to believe or understand, but that is a fact. And we cannot reach any kind of a peace accord with them unless they change that mindset. And I have to emphasize a point. Israel has proven in the past that it is willing to sacrifice a lot for peace. For example, with Egypt. When we made peace with Egypt in 1979, in 1977, we gave back the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt, which is 3 times the size of the state of Israel, filled very rich with oil, gas. We gave it back only in return to get a signature on a piece of paper for peace. We did the same with Jordan. We have peace with Jordan. We gave up land in order to have peace with Jordan. We had the Abraham Accords with the Emirates, United Arab Emirates, with Bahrain, with Morocco, with Sudan. We've made peace with them. We are willing to have peace. We want peace. But as long as we have to face existential threats, we will continue to defend ourselves.
All right. So let's agree on the premise that Hamas is a terrorist organization. There's no diplomacy, no governing structure. We can agree on that?
They did have a governing structure, but there's no diplomacy with Hamas. And they are a terrorist organization for the mere fact that they have been using violence and killings as part of their political motives, which is to get rid of Israel. That is the clear definition of terror and terrorist organization. And they are recognized as a terrorist organization, not only just by Israel, but by many countries around the world.
And I would agree to that too. We can understand why a terrorist organization like Hamas would not care about Israeli civilian deaths. But how does Israel reconcile its military actions with international human rights law, especially when civilian casualties in Palestine, so we hear, are so high, especially if Israel plans to conduct themselves with diplomacy?
First of all, there are absolutely civilian casualties in Gaza. That is terrible. It really is. The reason is that there are civilian casualties because they're being used as human shields by Hamas, which is hiding in schools, in hospitals, in residential areas, firing rockets, firing RPGs from residential areas. But if I don't know if you've seen, and I probably haven't, because that's part of the problem we have, that the Israeli narrative does not get the same exposure that the Palestinian side is. Israel has been warning continuously before it attacks. If we have a rocket fired at us from a residential area, we will give warning to that area that we are going to attack in 2 hours, to please leave that area. We have created humanitarian corridors where they are safe in order to try and prevent civilian casualties. And once again, the numbers that the world has, that the United Nations have, are all based on Hamas. Ask the UN where they get their numbers from. It's all based on Hamas. No one, no, and Hamas, of course, is lying. Now, we have proof, we know for evidence, and even international media outlets have said this. Any death in Gaza, Hamas will blame Israel. Someone is killed by a car accident, someone dies by a heart attack, whatever, they will add them to the list of casualties by Israel. It is part of the strategy, and it is working for them. It is working because you have the international community coming and saying, listen, well, we're getting these numbers of many civilian casualties. Israel stopped the war. Now, what does stop the war mean? It means that Hamas can continue govern Gaza and be a threat over Israeli citizens. It means that the 53 hostages who were kidnapped, innocent hostages kidnapped on October 7th, remain under Hamas custody, and Hamas can goes with impunity after it's the massacre it perpetrated in October 7th. I really want to ask you, would Trinidad and Tobago agree if ISIS could have implemented an attack such as this, killing 1,200 people, raping women and men, kidnapping them, decapitating them, would you allow ISIS to continue being a threat over Trinidad and Tobago? It's a scenario that is unimaginable, of course, because it does not, I mean, thankfully, the Caribbeans do not face that kind of threats, but unfortunately, we do.
Certainly not. We wouldn't like that at all.
Can you give us a clear picture or understanding of what life is like in Israel right now? Because when we spoke to Yusuf Al-Halou, you know, he was able to
it's a very vivid picture.
Give us a very, very vivid picture of what's happening in Gaza currently and how these citizens are living and what they're going through. So we just want to understand as well, you know, what's happening in Israel.
Well, we are in time of war, and times of war are always difficult. Israeli citizens are suffering. It is very difficult. First of all, sirens. I don't know if you've ever encountered sirens blaring in the middle of the night at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., because you have a barrage of ballistic missiles headed towards Israel. Just imagine what the children are going through. The psychological effects are long-term. We have families are suffering, children are suffering, people are being killed on a daily basis, families have been destroyed, buildings have been destroyed. It is very, very difficult. It is very difficult. But I do think that Israelis understand that we don't have a choice. We are facing an existential threat. And please forgive me for coming back to that point, but I really don't think that people in the Caribbean or in Trinidad can understand what it means that you face an existential threat, that you know that the survivability of your country is in question. It is something that is that psyche is very difficult to understand. But that is what is facing Israelis. And there's a consensus right now that we have to do whatever we can according to international law and try to refrain, to avoid as much as we can harming civilians. That is what we're doing in Iran, by the way. In Iran, just look at it. We've been attacking IRGC, which is the Iranian Revolution Guard Corps, the Iranian military. We've been focusing on them, on those connected to the Iranian nuclear program. They've been firing ballistic missiles into Israeli residential areas. That is who they are focusing on. So it is something that there's a huge difference between both sides. It is extremely difficult for Israelis right now. War is always a difficult period, and this is a very difficult period, because, especially for the civilians, because they are the targets of the current war. But we have no choice, and we will continue until we make sure that Israel's security is ensured.
I was actually watching the news the other day, where they were telling us that when the entire tensions between Israel and Iran had just boiled over after the attack on, I think Israel attacked Iran's nuclear facility, and of course Iran retaliated, and they said they were coming after everybody that sort of
Yes.
supports Israel. I remember hearing that. And my dad and I were talking about it, and we were like, Israel is really going through it right now because they're at war, it seems like, with everybody. Where are the
Well,
good relations with Israel? And what does that
so first
mean?
of all, as I mentioned, we're not at war with everybody. We have peace with Egypt, Jordan, the Emirates, Bahrain. We have a lot of countries. We're definitely not in war, not with Saudi Arabia, not with the Sunni country. Those that we are war with is all with Iran and its proxies, its tentacles. So who are those? It's Iran. It's Hamas that has been funded by Iran and trained by Iran. It's Hezbollah in Lebanon, funded by Iran and trained by Iran. The Houthis in Yemen, they are all firing into Israel because they are under Iranian directives. They are being funded by Iran. And so Iran is the head of the snake. Now, I just want to remind you all because I think people tend to forget. Iran has been attacking Israel for decades through its proxies, through Hamas, through Hezbollah. But last year, they even attacked Israel directly with hundreds of projectiles of cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, drones, both in April and October of last year. They sent hundreds of missiles towards Israel. But just go and look, who is Israel in war with? All of these are connected to Iran. So I know that is the image that many have seen because really there's a misunderstanding and a distortion of really of the reality. But it's Iran and its tentacles. And let me tell you a well-known secret. The majority of the moderate countries, Arab countries in the Middle East, are rooting for Israel. Not only that, some of them have actively assisted defending Israel in intercepting projectiles fired from Iran towards Israel. But there are the moderate countries in the Middle East, the Arab countries, are rooting for Israel. So please don't let this distorted image of the way things look like create an unrealistic picture of what really is happening. What is happening is that we are in war with Iran and its proxies. But look right now, Hezbollah in Lebanon. The government in Lebanon has warned Hezbollah not to take part in the current conflict we have with Iran. They warned them because the government of Lebanon understands that Hezbollah, which is not, it's not, they've been funded by Iran. It's actually a foreign entity within Lebanon. But right now they are very weak because in the last year and a half, we have managed to weaken them significantly. And right now, the Lebanese government is making sure that they do not attack Israel because this is could be dangerous for Lebanon as well. And the Houthis in Yemen, they've been in war. They've been responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people in Yemen. They've been in war with Saudi Arabia, and they've been funded by Iran, and they're an Iranian proxy. So it is much more complicated, and then the way you just presented it, we are not in war with everyone. We are in
Yes,
war with
it was sort of a
Iran
catch-all.
and
Yes,
its proxies.
it was sort of a catch-all. But I wanted to ask, this may sound like a simple question, but why is it that Iran has tensions with Israel? Is it because they're Jewish? It's a Jewish
So
state.
let me remind you, till 1979, we had actually diplomatic relations with Iran, very excellent relations between Israel and Iran. We had an embassy in Tehran. And if you remember, in 1979, after the Islamic Revolution, when the Ayatollah Khomeini took over by force, and they took over also the American embassy, if you remember, for 40 days, they held diplomats, the American diplomats, Canadian diplomats, they held them by force, did not allow them to leave. I mean, but since 1979, this extreme, radical, jihadistic, a cruel regime has been in control, and they see Israel because it's a non-Muslim entity. They see us as infidels, and that is why, unfortunately, we cannot reach some kind of a resolution with the current regime in Iran. I do have to say that many of Iranians, maybe I think the majority of Iranians yearn to go back to the time where they had peace with Israel, to the time of the Shah before the Islamic Revolution. They really yearn to go back to those times. So do we. We want to live in peace with Iran. We have no conflict with Iran. We have no problems with Iran. They're the ones who are attacking us because we are a non-Muslim entity in that region, and they want to spread their Shiite Islamic extreme ideology. And after they are done with Israel, they will continue. They will continue to North Africa, they will continue to Europe, and to the rest of the world. We are actually standing in the forefront of the Western world, of what is called maybe class of, if you remember Huntington's clash of civilizations. But we're standing in front of a regime that has an ideology of spreading its extremist religious ideology around the world.
Um, there have been, active calls for U.S. and Gulf mediation during all of the chaos, and especially with Iran saying that, a single call from, or a single call from Washington could halt Israeli bombing. So my question then is, how much diplomacy is actually happening behind the scenes, and what is the role of the U.S., especially under President Trump, actually playing in all of this?
Well, whenever a war takes place, there's always also diplomacy behind the scenes taking place. We are fully coordinated with the Americans, and we're working together with European partners as well, and with Arab moderate states in the region. There is a lot of concern on the one hand of how this war could escalate, and we're all hoping it won't. But on the other hand, I can tell you that mostly behind the scenes and quietly, there is a lot of understanding and recognition of what Israel is doing, because Iran has been deceiving the world for decades, for many years. Just last week, a report from the IAEA, the International Agency for Atomic Energy, came out with a report where they said that Iran has been lying and been deceiving in regards to its nuclear program, military nuclear program. And Iran, in response, announced that it's going to open another nuclear reactor for uranium enrichment. So there's a lot of understanding, because there's been a lot of concern from a nuclear Iran. If it weren't for Israel, today, there would Syria, which look at the mess that is going on in Syria, and Iraq, two countries that are very unstable, very problematic, would have had nuclear weapons. Israel prevented that from happening. When in the past, countries tried diplomatically to prevent North Korea from achieving or having nuclear weapons. And unfortunately, although they tried to do it diplomatically, North Korea lied and deceived, and today are threatening South Korea and many countries in Southeast Asia, in the Asian region, because they are a nuclear power. We cannot allow that to happen with Iran. It would be a severe threat to the state of Israel. And what Israel did was a preemptive attack, because there are many of those around the world who would wait for Israel nuclear bomb missile, and only then attack back. We cannot wait for that point. We've reached the 90th minute. Iran has enriched 60% of uranium, which is very close to the threshold of having nuclear weapons, and they've had enough uranium that would be enough for 9 nuclear bombs. That is unbelievable. Israel is a tiny country. We cannot allow ourselves to absorb 1 nuclear bomb. So we've reached to that point where Iran is on the threshold of being a nuclear power, and we cannot allow that. Diplomacy, unfortunately, did not work. They've been continuing to lie and deceive continuously. It hasn't worked, and that is why we had no other option but have that preemptive attack. Hopefully, I do hope that Iran returns to the negotiating table and agrees to, but really entirely and completely close its enrichment program, its ballistic missile program, because we cannot continue to live under that threat.
So then I want to ask, what demands would Israel need to see being met in order to consider pausing their military action?
For them to lay down their arms.
Sorry?
For them to lay down their arms. So essentially, you want Iran.
Not their arms. I mean, we're not telling Iran not to have a military, but they have to completely desist with their nuclear program. We have to see that they built so many nuclear sites underground, in Fordow, in Natanz, in Isfahan, in many areas in Iraq, in many areas in Iran. And Iran has a huge territory, and all over. So we have to make sure that they close all their nuclear sites, but they have to be under complete supervision and inspection by the international inspectors. And also, they have to persist with to stop with their ballistic missile program, which can reach all the way to Europe and maybe, in the future, this continent as well, of Latin America, of the Western Hemisphere. So they need to, because they were on their way of building 3,000 ballistic missiles a year. Can you imagine? Just look at the damage that around 30 missiles that have managed to penetrate Israel's defenses, the huge damage that they've done to Israeli cities. Just imagine if they had 10,000 ballistic missiles. So we want to make sure that they end their nuclear program and their ballistic missile program.
When you explain it, it does make sense from my end listening, but can you understand what it looks like on the world stage, that it's not a right to self-defense, you're not defending yourself, you did a preemptive attack. A lot of people would see that as horrible.
So if you know that there's someone coming towards your house with an intent to kill you, and he's got a weapon in his hand, and he's about to fire, and you fire first because you know he's about to shoot, is that something that you don't think is logical? You know, the Iranian regime has been saying publicly, they haven't been hiding it, that they are intent in destroying the state of Israel. There is actually a digital clock in the center of Tehran, in a square in Tehran, that is counting backwards, because in 2015, the Ayatollah, the supreme leader, said that Israel will survive no more than 25 years because we will make sure that we destroy it. So that clock has been put there and started counting back 25 years from 2015. They've come out and said Israel has no right to exist, and we are going to destroy Israel. This has been said by the supreme leader, the Ayatollah, by their presidents, by the head of the military. We've seen this with the proxies that have been part of their whole program to destroy Israel. They had a plan in place that would involve their proxies in the Middle East and their nuclear program and the ballistic missile program with the intention, with the objective of destroying the state of Israel. So whether people understand this or not, or if they expect Israel to wait for the first nuclear missile to hit Israel, I think they're wrong. I think we've seen that the Iranians have been deceiving and lying and have been continuing full force with their intention to destroy the state of Israel. We reached that point where we really had no option, but we had to prevent them from crossing that threshold because they were extremely close. They are very, very close. Once they have such a lot of amount of 60% enriched uranium, that means they have a ballistic missile program. That means that they are really very, very close to acquiring nuclear weapons, and then we know that they also have the intention to use them.
Your Excellency, I'm going to quote you here. And you said this in regards to Palestine, but I think it could go both ways when it comes to Iran as well. You said, it is unacceptable that the right to use force in self-defense is questioned in relation to Israel. But wouldn't you say that same principle may apply to, say, Iran or Palestine as well?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that Iran we did not even have to reach this point. We've never threatened for the destruction of the state of Iran. We never have. They do it continuously. And what I'm saying is also, if Iran didn't have weapons at all and couldn't threaten Israel, Iran would continue to thrive. If Israel did not have weapons at all, we would be destroyed by the Iranians and by its proxies. That's what I'm saying. We have the right to defend ourselves once our mere existence is being threatened. I think that every entity that wants to live in peace had the right to have weapons and had the right to defend itself from another entity that wants to cause a deliberate harm or to destroy it. But if Iran, as I mentioned, if Iran deceases from its nuclear program and ballistic program, we have no reason to be in any conflict with Iran. We're not looking for conflict with Iran. We haven't called for its destruction.
Does Iran believe that? Does Iran believe that it'd be okay if they?
Well, the facts show till 1979 we lived in peace with Iran. We didn't change. It was Iran that changed. It was Iran that was taken over by a radical extreme regime, which its own people are suffering from its hand. Iran is a dictatorship today. So I think Iranian people, I think, if you follow Iranian, social media, where Iranians can say their voice without being recognized, see how many of them are yearning for peace again with Israel. It's huge numbers of Iranians. I'm yearning, and we as Israelis, we yearn for peace with Iran. We don't want any war with Iran. We're not looking for conflict with Iran, but we definitely will not allow this extreme regime to continue threatening Israel's existence.
I have a question, kind of piggybacking off of these Jada's question and then the statements. You know, even if these strikes are justified as self-defense, don't you think that it might provoke a prolonged regional instability across the different
Actually,
countries?
to tell you the truth, I think opposite. I think the instability that we've been seeing for many, many years in the Middle East has actually been instigated by the fact that Iran was allowed to act with impunity. Iran, as I said, has been funding proxies, by the way, not only against Israel. I would please, if you would interview Arabs from the Emirates, or speak to Arabs from Jordan or Saudi Arabia, how they feel, what their feeling is towards a nuclear Iran. I think you will be surprised to hear how much they're concerned about it and how much against they are against it. All the instability that we're seeing right now in the Middle East is all perpetrated by Iran, which is funding proxies. It sent its tentacles. It's amazing. It has sent its tentacles all around the region, but it suffered huge blows. One of its tentacles was actually the Syrian regime under the President Bashar al-Assad, who his regime just a few months ago collapsed, and now the new regime is totally against Iran because they know that Iran was the one responsible for their sufferings. But Hezbollah it still has, but it used to be a power stronger than most militaries in the Middle East. And they were in control of Lebanon. Lebanon has been completely suffering because of Hezbollah's power, which Hezbollah is a Shiite Iranian tentacle in Lebanon. Hamas and the Islamic Jihad in the Palestinian areas. Look at the Shiite groups in Iraq, which are being funded by Iran. Look at the Houthis in Yemen. I'm sure you've never heard of the Houthis before. Why? The only reason you're hearing about Houthis now is because Israel is now suffering from the Houthis and fighting back against the Houthis. But the Houthis have been responsible for the deaths of tens or hundreds of thousands of people. They've caused a famine for 1 million people or 500,000 people who are in complete hunger. But you've never heard of them before because Israel was not involved. But if you Google it and see what has been going on with the Houthis, you'll see it's been going on for many, many years, not just recently. But the reason you only hear about them now is because Israel is involved. So I would really urge you all, take with a lot of caution everything that is being circulated on social media and even on the regular media, because it is the distortion and the lines are just unbelievable.
I think that's why we're having this conversation.
No, I appreciate that. I really do. I appreciate you enabling me to sound my side of the story. But you do. I think you'll agree that the exposure that the Israeli side gets is very, very minimal in comparison to that of the pro-Palestinian or pro-Iranian side.
And I think that kind of stems from the idea that the Palestinians don't have the backing or the resources that Israel has to defend themselves, or for it to even be a fair fight. And that has been.
I would agree with that. First of all, absolutely, militarily, there's no comparison. But if it would be in vice versa, I would not be here speaking with you because they would have destroyed Israel yesterday if they could have. But secondly, I have to say, if we talk about peace or a diplomatic resolution, there you need two to tango. As many tanks or airplanes as you have, if one side does not want to reach a real, viable, peaceful resolution, you cannot reach it. Now, the Palestinians actually, in that regard, when it comes to the political arena, the diplomatic arena, they are the Goliath. We are David. Because, as I said, they have the automatic majority in the United Nations. that support Palestinians automatically, immediately will support them. They have a huge Muslim population around the world, which unfortunately will automatically support them. You know, there are only 15 million Jews in the world, in the whole world, 15 million, and there's about 1.7 billion Muslims around the world. So you can, and many of them, unfortunately, not all of them, many of them support Israel actually, but a big chunk of them will support the Palestinians automatically, no matter what, and they will assist in spreading misinformation and disinformation against Israel. So yes, I have to agree that in that regard we have a huge disadvantage. We are David, they are Goliath. In that regard, when it comes to the diplomatic, political, international arena, they have a huge, huge support that we can only dream of.
And that's true, but you guys are aligned with the US as well. There's something I heard, just to play devil's advocate, this is not my words, but somebody else, that Israel is trying to be the USA of the Middle East. Can you respond to that?
No, not at all, not at all. But that's not our what we just want to live peacefully in our ancestral land, in our tiny piece of land. It's a very, very small country, Israel. You know, I saw this map a few days ago. It's a funny map. It shows all the Arab countries in red in the Middle East and in North Africa. That all are Arab or Muslim, because Iran, for instance, is not Arab; it's a Muslim country. But all the Arab, huge, huge, huge that piece of land, you know. And then you see this tiny speck, a really tiny dot that you have to relook, which is blue. And then someone, you know, cynically said, "Oh, this is a colonial power. We are the colonized. We're a tiny, tiny speck of land, tiny country, which is our ancestral country, our ancestral land, where our forefathers lived here 3,500 years ago." And we are the ones being accused of being colonizers or occupiers. It really is ludicrous. But we definitely don't want to be the USA or whatever that means. I mean, I would like to be United States, because I think United States has a lot of advantages to it. It's a modern and flourishing and rich country. But we're not looking to be an empire or a superpower. We need to be a superpower in order to defend ourselves. But we want to live side by side with our neighbors, just like we've reached peace. As I told you, we gave back land that is 3 times the size of the state of Israel, just to get a signature on a piece of paper with Egypt that is a peaceful resolution between Israel and Egypt. And we've done that with other countries as well. We want to be part of the Middle East, to live in peace and in harmony with all our neighbors.
You would have said a word there that you don't want to be the king or the emperor of the middle. The
Well, you said that being the USA, so I'm not saying, I think you're meaning that being an empire or whatever, a superpower or whatever that means. So I mean, no, we're not looking to, look, thankfully, because of Israel's really advanced technology and our strong economy, we are a power, we are a superpower, and because of the necessity to defend ourselves. If we did not need an army, we would have given it up tomorrow, because the military in Israel is taking many resources from Israel's economy. It is a huge strain on Israel's economy. But we do not have a choice. We are defending ourselves. We are not looking to be a superpower or whatever. We want to live in peace with our neighbors.
But you're defending yourself against a country that has less military power. How do you reconcile those two facts?
Iran, well, listen, Iran, first of all, Iran is 10 times, the population of Iran is 10 times the size of Israel. The territory of Iran is, I'm not sure exactly how, but many, many, many times of the state of Israel. So to say that they are definitely not weaker in that regard, you know, we are actually the ones who are more, that are more, you know, can receive, are not more sustainable, or not sustainable, or are more vulnerable. Sorry, that's the word I was looking for. Are more vulnerable to attacks, because the population is much smaller, the territory is much smaller. But what we are doing right now is exactly that. Is exactly to make sure that Israel continues to exist and survive. And a nuclear Iran would put Israel in huge peril. So I wouldn't say, you know, Iran, there's no intention from the Israeli side to destroy Iran or cause anything except from the prevention of its nuclear program and its ballistic missile program.
So I have to ask, because well, we already established that in order for Israel to pause its military action on Iran, they would have to see nuclear concession, right? So with that, I'm asking the same question about Israel with Hamas or Gaza. What demands would Israel have to see being met in order for peace to happen and military action to be halted?
Exactly. So we have two official objectives, declared objectives that we are looking for with Hamas in Gaza. One is the full and immediate release of all the hostages. We have 53 hostages, dead and alive, who are being held by Hamas in Gaza for 619 days. The second is that Hamas gives up its weapons and its governance and allows for new elections, not us, not Israel, but a new governance in Gaza, because Hamas was elected in 2006. This was supposed to be every 4 years, supposed to be elections. There hasn't been not one election there since, because they're a dictatorship. They're a cruel dictator, terroristic regime. So since 2000, well, the election took place in 2005. Hamas took over, actually violently, from the Palestinian Authority that did not give up its power in 2006, and from 2007 we've been seeing. Well, Israel left Gaza in 2005. 2006 were elections, and 2007 Hamas took over very violently. And since then we've been facing a barrage of rockets. So there have been no elections. I think it's time for the Palestinians to decide that they want to walk with Israel on the path of peace and reconciliation, and not on that of war. And for that's the second objective, is Hamas can no longer be allowed to govern Gaza.
And I think that's what most people would want. If you're looking in from the inside, outside in, you'd want Hamas to step down, because it's obvious that there's major destruction there that's causing, prolonging this conflict, if you will. But when
in that regard, if I just may, just because you mentioned before speaking to Palestinian, ask that Palestinian if he wants a Palestinian, who would govern the Palestinian state? Because Hamas and the Palestinian Authority themselves are rivals, are enemies of each other. So where exactly do they envision a Palestinian state governed by who? If he's speaking on behalf of the Palestinian Authority, he will say, oh, well, the Palestinian Authority. But Hamas is not allowing it. The majority of Palestinians themselves are fed up with the Palestinian Authority because it's such a corrupt entity itself. But who would govern it? So it's all of our dream that we can live side by side peacefully, but we have to be realistic, and we have to acknowledge the fact that right now, currently, the Palestinians are not even prepared to govern themselves or to have an independent state, and we have to change that.
If you were to offer some advice to Palestine, say Hamas has gone, the Palestinian Authority has been broken down, what advice would you offer to Palestine if they want to become a governing state, a recognized state?
That's a great question. So I would say, first of all, stop the incitement against Israel and against Jews. Just stop the incitement. Start teaching your children to live in peace, not in war, and not to destroy. Secondly, focus on building your own government institutions. Israel was given its independence by the United Nations in 1947. But the Jews in Israel have been working decades before to create the institutions needed for an independent country. And the Palestinians, on the other hand, have been investing in their military power. Look at all these tunnels that have been built by Hamas in Gaza. An amazing web of tunnels, larger than the London Tube, okay, in London, the underground train in England, in London. That was money. Big chunk of it was given by the international community for them to build institutions, to build hospitals or schools, and they took that money and they used it for building tunnels underground, these advanced tunnels, which are mostly meant for their own people, not for the Palestinian people, but there's no shelter that they built for Palestinians, for the Palestinian population. So they need to stop the incitement. They need to focus on building their own institutions. They need to lay down their weapons against Israel, stop for these calls for jihad and terrorism against Israel, but really teach their people for peace and stop playing the victim card. The Palestinians are excellent in playing the victim card. We are victims in that they know that they have been given numerous opportunities to have their own independent, viable entity, and they are the ones who rejected it because they keep on believing. And I have to say, many times supported by the international community, not deliberately, but that is how it comes out to be. They've been believing that they can get rid of Israel and build and create a Palestinian state on all of that land. And that is impossible. It will never happen. But many within the Palestinians do still believe that that is something that is that can happen.
Mm-hmm. So going back to the earliest part of our conversation, when you stated that you don't recognize Palestine or the state of Palestine, what was it like? What was your initial reaction when
No, I'm not saying I don't. I mean, you know, in Israel, we have many opinions, democratic country, and there are people in Israel who do support a Palestinian state, others who are very much against.
Okay.
What I'm saying is, if you look at the current situation right now, there's no real viable path for a Palestinian state because the Palestinians themselves are not focused on that. They are focused on the destruction of the state of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, if you teach your children in schools that Israel has to be destroyed, and they grow up and they say, well, I want to be a martyr, I want to be a fighter against Israel, which is a terrorist, I want to be a suicide bomber, I want to, you know, you have to, it's amazing, you have TV, children TV programs where you have these young little children, 6 years old, 7 years old, 8 years old, who say, I want to be a shaheed, I want to be a martyr, who say, I support jihad, which is, I can send you these, you can see these programs, it's just unbelievable. The way they teach, indoctrinate their kids to hate Israel, to hate the Jews, and to glorify terrorism and violence.
Mm-hmm. So when Hamas was elected, that would have been in 2006, around there. But the people who are suffering now, they didn't elect, especially the youth, so people of like our generation, they didn't elect Hamas. So on average, how many people would you say actually support Hamas in Palestine right now?
Well, unfortunately, polls show that right now, not only does a majority of Palestinians support Hamas because they see them as, you know, these heroes fighting Israel, because as I said, that's part of the indoctrination they're going through, a big majority of them, unfortunately, have supported this October 7th massacre. Mm-hmm. So as it is true that, you know, Hamas was elected 19 years ago, and so many of your children did not vote for them. That is still the majority of those living today in Gaza are still the ones who elected them. But even that, I mean, I'm not coming and trying to say all the Gazans are with Hamas, but a big majority of them in polls show that they support Hamas and support the massacre of October 7th. But what we are also seeing, on the other hand, is a growing frustration from people in Gaza, from Palestinians in Gaza, against Hamas. They understand that what Hamas is doing is hurting them. They understand that Hamas is using them as human shields, that Hamas is forcefully trying to prevent humanitarian aid from reaching them. So I think we're seeing a growing frustration against Hamas, but I couldn't tell you right now, percentage-wise, where it's standing. But I hope that once Hamas is eliminated, that the people in Gaza would vote for a government that would strive for peace with Israel and strive to live side by side with Israel.
Mm-hmm. So then, is it safe to say that the Israeli government still views a two-state solution as a viable goal in the end?
No, right now we cannot, because it is not because of the fact that of what I just told you. The current government definitely is not. It does not support that kind of path right now because of the situation.
So then, if Hamas steps down, Is that two-state?
Well, if Hamas steps down, there are many solutions on the table, which from self-autonomy and other kind of independent entities. Prime Minister Netanyahu in the past even said, I would support a Palestinian independent entity, but I'm not sure that they would support what I'm willing to give them. Because, for instance, we would not allow them to have a very big army. It would have to be so that in order for them not to have a huge threat, to be a huge threat over Israel, or allow Iran to enter that entity. So I think right now the question of a Palestinian state, it's not on the table right now. Even if you have countries that recognize Palestinian state, it is more of, it really is not, it's not serious. It's a recognition that is on ice. If for us to even deliberate such a kind of a solution, we have to see a significant change within the Palestinian society. And as I said, there are many in Israel that do support a Palestinian state, but they also understand that there have to be a lot of changes. Others who are completely against it because they see it as a threat towards the state of Israel, to its mere existence. And like with any democracy, you have opinions, you have different opinions, and you have people electing a government depending on the way they see things.
What did you mean when you said that you wouldn't allow them to have a very big army? Can you clarify that for me, please?
As I said, when we were discussing an agreement with the Palestinians, so we said that it had to be demilitarized. That as part of the agreement, because otherwise it would be. I think it's very difficult to understand what a threat Palestinians could be over Israel, because there, even if you look at the West Bank, for instance, Judean Samir, they are right near to Jerusalem, to the center of Israel, to strategic areas. They are located. It's Israel in its the width of Israel, in some parts of it is 9 kilometers. That's it. From the West Bank to the Mediterranean Sea, there's only 9 kilometers separate that. That is something that in mere minutes with a military you could cut off. So we're saying that if, as part of a deal, the Palestinians would have a military force for them to self-defense or for policing, but not to the extent that would be an existential threat over Israel. That was what was discussed previously during these dialogues that we've had.
When former Foreign Affairs Minister Amory Brown would have said that we, as Trinidad and Tobago, recognize Palestine as a state of its own, what was that like for you? What was your initial reaction?
I was disappointed. We were, of course, against it, because what he did was give a prize to Hamas following the massacre, the genocide that they perpetrated against Israelis. So they either killed or kidnapped whoever they saw in their path. So that was a big disappointment because it was a prize. But in fact, it didn't really have any effect. I think it's just because, again, as I mentioned, the Palestinians cannot have a state as long as they continue to operate and act the way they do. And I think a majority, I think even the government of Trinidad and Tobago, Prime Minister Amy Brown, I think they understand that this recognition, as symbolic as it may be, will have no real effect on what is happening on the ground. And really, I tell the international community, if you want to have this effect, if you want to try and bring to some kind of a peaceful resolution, the pressure should be put first and foremost over Hamas to lay down its weapon and to release the hostages, but also over the Palestinians to stop with this incitement, this incredible incitement that goes on within Palestinian society, whether it's in schools, whether it's in the media, on TV, the statements given by leaders. I mean, it just has to stop.
So we are going to begin to wrap up soon, but I wanted to ask a question specific to anti-Semitic rhetoric. When we say something like free Palestine, free Gaza, why is that sometimes interpreted as anti-Semitism?
because today, the way it's been used after October 7, it means the destruction of the state of Israel. And because it makes, and in the context that it's given within campuses, for instance, it creates a huge, it calls for not only the destruction of the only Jewish state that exists. You know, there are 52 Muslim countries around the world and one Jewish state. But not only for the destruction, people chanting that in public places in the Western world, um, and when they know that there are a lot of Jews in those campuses studying, they know that that's a threat toward them. They know how what fear it causes to them. You know, the two Israeli young diplomats who were murdered in Washington D.C. About a few weeks ago in
Yes.
cold blood. Their murderer chanted "Free Palestine" while he murdered them, while he killed them. The attack that was perpetrated against Jewish, a very small elderly Jews who had a peaceful march in support, calling for the release of hostages. That was what they were marching for. They were attacked by an Egyptian immigrant in the United States in Auckland who threw Molotov cocktail bottles toward them, calling for and shouting "Free Palestine." So today it's a trigger word that is being used against to instill fear within Jewish population. That is why it is anti-Semitic. Now again, I differentiate because you can, first of all, you can criticize the government of Israel. You can say that you support a Palestinian state. That is not anti-Semitic. Absolutely. I might disagree with you on that. I might disagree with your criticism, but that is not anti-Semitic. We differentiate between that and between screaming, wearing
Yes.
keffiyehs, and screaming, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Free Palestine. When you know there's a big number of Jewish students or people in that vicinity, and they know that this is being used to trigger violence against them, that is when it is anti-Semitic, because it is intended to instill fear into the hearts of Jews. And I urge you again, when people say "Free Palestine," what do they mean? What does it actually mean? Because do they and please ask the next time you speak to a Palestinian rep, whoever, please ask them if they do recognize the Israel's not only right to exist, Israel's existence as a Jewish state. Would they recognize that? Would they agree to that for Israel to continue as a Jewish state? And
Thank you for
unfortunately,
that.
many of them don't.
Thank you for that advice. That's a good place to start when we're having conversations like these. And I did want to specify what the people who were murdered in DC, Yaron Nashinki and Sarah Milgram, just to say their names.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that was a terrible
He
attack.
by the way, he was an Israeli Christian. He was an American Jew. But the attacker, he only knew that he thought that they were both Jews, and because they left an event that was organized by a Jewish organization for young diplomats, which was actually trying to see how to bring to an end to the current conflict. And they were murdered in cold. He didn't know who they were. I mean, and he just knew that they were Jewish, and they were murdered in cold blood while he was chanting "Free Palestine."
That's absolutely horrible. So what message do you have for young people, especially those on campuses who they feel strongly about Palestinians suffering, but they feel about Israel as well. They want to avoid going into anti-Semitic rhetoric. What do you say to people
Yeah.
like that?
I want to tell you, I feel for the Palestinians suffering. Israelis are suffering as well. But I wish we would not have reached this point. You know, look at all the videos Palestinians are showing about how it was to live in Palestine before October 7th. They live, you have these beautiful condos and beaches and swimming pools. I mean, we want them to live in peace next to us. We want them to flourish and prosper. So the message is really, if you really support the Palestinians, chanting against Israel will not help. We are going to continue defending ourselves against any terrorist entity that is trying to exterminate us. What you have to do is call for the freedom of Palestine from Hamas. Hamas is the one that has been in control of Gaza since 2006, as we mentioned, when they were elected, with an iron fist. They've been, there are videos that came out that we found of them torturing Palestinians who were against the regime, who were politically who were anti-Hamas or anti the government in Gaza, and they were being really in horrific ways. They were being tortured. We have to get rid of Hamas. If you really support the Palestinians, if you want an end of the suffering of the Palestinian people, we have to get rid of Hamas, and we have to stop the just unbelievable indoctrination against Jews and Israelis.
Yeah. All right. So just finally, what is your message of hope, not as a diplomat, but as a citizen of Israel? What's your personal hope?
Well, as we've proven that we can reach peace with between Israel and the other Arab countries, Egypt used to be our fiercest and worst enemy, and we have been living in peace with them for over 40 years. So if we've proven that we can reach peace. So I am optimistic because I think at the end of the day, it's in our interest. It's definitely in Israel's interest to live in peace. We are not looking for wars. I don't want my children to go and risk their lives in defense of Israel. So my message of optimism is Israel is extending its hand of peace for anyone that is willing to extend their hand back. So, and if we can find people within the Palestinian society, within Iran, that are willing to reach a peaceful resolution with Israel, live side by side with Israel in peace, we will get there. And I'm sure that one day, we have to believe it, we will be able to reach that point.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything at all that Israel can do that they haven't done or thinking about doing to ease Palestinian suffering at this point in time?
Well, absolutely. We've opened now centers together with the Americans, which are centers for humanitarian aid, that we are now providing directly to the Palestinian people. That does not go through Hamas, directly to the Palestinian people, which, by the way, is frustrating Hamas a lot. And they've been actually killing people, unfortunately, who have been coming near to those centers, but they are coming. So we are allowing really a huge amount of humanitarian aid to enter Gaza, but we are trying to make sure that it goes directly to the people of Gaza and not to Hamas.
Yes. So Ambassador Badov, thank you so much for your time, your insights, and for engaging with us in this very difficult conversation, but timely conversation.
Thank you very much, and thank you for permitting me to speak on your show and giving me the time. I appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you so much, and have a beautiful day.
You too. Take care.
Thank you.
Yes. So, I mean, conversations like this, this one and the one that we had with Palestinian journalist Yusuf Al-Halou, they're not meant to solve anything really. It's meant to humanize what's happening and understand and allow us to understand what's happening as well.
Yeah, I think it's important to have these conversations because it builds context, as we would have heard from Yusuf Al-Halou versus what we heard from Ambassador Badov a couple of moments ago. A lot of the points, they were conflicting. So, but once you hear both sides, you're able to sort of build an idea or belief of your own.
And also it's a reminder that, behind these wars and behind these politics and the headlines, it's people, real people, and once we get that, then and we're able to put into context when we see different headlines from around the world about the war that's happening, and then getting a conversation like this, we're now able to put proper emotion and proper,
we can make it relatable because people are able to see themselves in a situation.
Yeah. So I really appreciated, the ambassador taking time to come and have this conversation with us, as well as Mr. Al-Halou.
And I just wanted to say, in a conversation like this or a discussion like this, we do need to remain unbiased. Of course, there's a lot of emotions flying on both sides because once you see people like this many dead, you see pictures and videos of people suffering on both sides of the aisle. There's a narrative that is created there, but we want to remain unbiased. So we really hope that the conversations that we would have had over the past couple of days, maybe like week or two, can provide you with insights so that you're able to, because that's what we do as journalists, is
Yes.
for you, present the information for you to make your own informed decision.
Yes.
So,
and we made it our duty to get the Israeli side of the story as well, because, as Jada said, we are meant to be unbiased and we are not picking sides. To us, there's no right or wrong. We are just, doing our job to present you with information for you to make your own decision, and that's your views, so
I mean, there's a moral right and wrong, and of course, I guess personally we'd have our own biases, but at the end of the day, how we present as journalists is for you to make your informed decision. But thank you so much for sticking with us on AM Prime this morning.
yes. So as always, I'm going to leave you with this. I hope it's in line with the conversation this morning. Hope is the last thing ever lost. This is a quote by, it's an Italian proverb. Hope is the last thing ever lost, because without hope, then you have nothing. So as long as there's hope,
There's a future.
there's a future.
I like that.
Yeah.
As long as there's hope. Hope is the last thing
Hope is
ever
the
lost.
last thing ever lost.
Who's it by again?
It's an Italian proverb.
Okay, well, as always, you can engage with us on WESN TV, WESN CC, or you can WhatsApp us at any point in time, 682-9376, 682-9376, and your comments and suggestions can be featured here on AM Prime with Naomi and I.
Yeah. So guys, stay safe, stay inspired, stay informed, and
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Coming up next, we have Sean Michael Small with Talking Point. So we'll see you back
Bye-bye.
another time.
WESN.
You are watching Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Just give an overview of what exactly is that split arrangement.
Nah, you don't need to register nothing. We can do that another time. But then it becomes a hit, and then everybody starts to want to claim.
The laws that predate many of the independent countries' constitutions are going to be those colonial laws.
We know there are an infinite amount of circumstances that would lead to a murder.
I have a great idea and I have a great concept, but until it's actually expressed, it does not become intellectual property.
Accomplishments or targets of a forensic accountant is to quantify what may have been lost.
So we believe we defend criminals and we manipulated the law and we exploited the system.
A responsible journalist will reach out to the person who they have the information on for a comment.
Our award-winning show is back, and this season promises to be even more exciting than before. What's Up Doc isn't just a title, it's a call to action for anyone who wants to improve their health and well-being. Join us on this thrilling ride towards better health on WESN Content Capital.
We are tackling the hard-hitting topics, some controversial topics, some topics we sweep under the rug. You don't always have to forgive in a relationship for it to move forward.
If it is you are in a situation where you forgive the person, but to the detriment of yourself, what are you really doing?
It is very uncommon for somebody in the younger age group to have dementia.
Atheists don't not believe.
Is that I can't disprove God, but you also can't prove God, so we cannot have a stalemate.
You'll focus on the woman who's being the victim,
right,
or the man is being the victim. We exclude the children.
Folks are trying to study the underlying brain mechanism to figure out how does this particular disorder happen in the brain? How is the brain processing this?
Don't worry about AI, worry about humans working with AI.
Are you willing to learn new skills to stay relevant for the future job market? That's the challenge that people are going to struggle with.
This is Face of Sports, WESN Content Capital. How you felt about the kiss on the lip?
That's the business, I'm nothing to do with that.
I find that was distasteful.
The national senior team, whether you like it or not, that is the model for all other teams to follow.
I'm assuming that the regional requirement may be a much stricter requirement.
This is not about Pro League and Super League. This is a league run by the Normalization Committee that I'm responsible for.
Nobody expected FIFA to fund this arrangement.
If we don't get a professional attitude towards this, we are doomed for failure.
You break the balance, trip the leg, control the body.
They ain't gonna stand put forever.
Why you want the Chiefs to lose so? Why you want the Chiefs to lose so?
They already have two, Lamar.
Why? You're jealous because you know the Chiefs getting closer to the Patriots. Let's go to the last part.
No.
Let's go to the last part.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
We've got Trump. We might have Vance next time.